Well, if you're just joining us, this week we've been looking at Proverbs 6:16, and basically through verse 19, where Solomon is talking about the 7 things that God detests, things he hates. In fact, the King James says they're abominations to God. That's a great word, abominations. And essentially, to understand what abomination means, it means that it's something that is so far removed from the nature of God that it never entered into the thought of God or the mind of God. It's something completely opposite from God. It's really in the realm of what's evil, or is the acts of the devil, who is always the direct opposite of God on every issue. And so we've gone through these issues about, not being haughty and not being liars and not shedding innocent blood and not be evil schemers coming up with tricky, scheming ideas, which leaves us with 3 more things that we have to talk about. One is that feet that are swift or quick to rush into evil. A false witness, number 6, who stirs up or pours out lies. And number 7, a man who stirs up dissension among his brethren. Now, these 3 all are kind of interconnected in many ways, because they really grow out of number 4, which was coming up with a scheme to accomplish some kind of nefarious objective, to do something that's wrong, to take advantage of something. And the first thing is that the quickness means here not so much as fast, but as a readiness to rush into evil. In other words, it's kind of like finding pleasure in doing something evil. Before I was a Christian, I remember as a young man that there were things, especially dealing with alcohol and drugs and even mischievous vandalism and misbehavior, even lying. I used to lie to people just to see if I could trick them. I mean, my brother and I kind of made this into a game where how big a lie can I tell somebody to get them to believe it? And I look back on it and go, my goodness gracious, how wrong and twisted is that? Well, I have to say that I learned it as a young child, watching it in my own home. But the whole point was that, it was such a comeuppance when I became a Christian and realized that not being honest was really pretty displeasing to God. But the first thing I find is that it got to the place where there were certain things, if there was alcohol involved, if there was drugs involved, if there was some other pleasure or thing that I wasn't supposed to be doing in the eyes of God, I was pretty quick to go after that. You didn't have to ask me twice. I wanted to rush into that thing which was evil. And it's the idea that darkness provides a place of pleasure, a place of satisfaction, of fulfillment. And I, like most people, was raised in a culture that basically said that things that are forbidden are the things that are the most fun. And so when something was forbidden, they suddenly became attractive. It's later on, Solomon puts it this way, they say that stolen waters are sweet. The idea that you've stolen something you shouldn't have and somehow it tastes sweeter. I've found that actually that's not true. In fact, when you steal something, that you can't really enjoy it because you're now afraid that somebody's going to catch you or steal it from you, just like you stole it from somebody else. So it's not really a truism, but that's the belief that people have. And that's the problem of sin. Sin really finds its ability to thrive in people's lives by convincing us to believe things that aren't true as being true. And they may be obviously and clearly true. We can look at the history of mankind and realize that so many bad behaviors are destructive behaviors, and yet people still act as if somehow there's beneficial behaviors. It's kind of like the idea of people always wanting to be wealthy. Solomon warns, he says, money that comes to you quickly will evaporate quickly. And he says, the more money you have, the more problems you're going to have to deal with. And, it's simple reality of life that the more things you have to maintain, the more work you have to put into maintaining what you have to maintain. And that's why my wife and I were talking about this, saying, as we get older, it becomes more and more difficult for us to maintain our home and our cars and all the little gadgets and widgets we have around our home. And we find ourselves having to pray a lot, saying, God, show us how to fix this. But at the same time, we realize there is a point where your capacity to do that is diminished. And what do most people do when they get to a certain age? They start looking to how they can simplify their life. And isn't that interesting? We spend most of our life trying to accumulate as much as we can. And then we get to a certain point where we want to reduce what we have so that we can manage what we do have. And we find that what we can manage becomes a smaller and smaller pile. So the things that we often think are so attractive and we want to rush into are the things that oftentimes are such a heavy burden to be borne. And that's why when people look at something that the Bible says, thou shalt not, and they choose to do it, what they find is it leads to an incredible complexity. I think one of the most obvious examples is divorce. Now, I'm not saying that every divorce is unjustified. There are innocent people in divorce situations. I know there's some people saying everybody's wrong, there's no innocent parties. That's probably true, but there are plenty of situations I've dealt with where you have two imperfect people who have their own issues, but one of them has chosen to violate the covenant. And I mean, that's really serious when they decide, I don't want to be faithful to you anymore. I'm going to go do my own thing. And that always turns out bad. I often point out to people, the only people who win in a divorce are the lawyers. Everybody else basically loses just about everything they have, and it leads to greater impoverishment than just about anything else that happens in our culture. It's worse than losing a job. And yet people do it at increasing levels. It's gotten so bad that today most people are choosing not to get married at all so they don't have to deal with the commitment, and later on have to deal with what they think is the eventuality of getting divorced anyway. And so here, one of the most important things, most valuable assets that God has given to man, which is a married life and a family, people are now running away from and seeing it as evil because they don't want to have to go through the prospect of a divorce, which they think is unavoidable. And it is avoidable. You just decide that it's not going to happen. It doesn't mean that you're always happy. It doesn't mean you always like what's going on. You just simply say, I'm just going to stick with it. I'm going to just stay faithful to my vows. And so we live in an age where people are encouraged to rush into all kinds of evil. And God says, when I see people in a hurry to do something that they know is wrong, that I've declared is wrong, that really is something that I find very distasteful. But secondly, he talks about, or number 6 in his list is that a person who becomes a false witness and who pours out lies. Now, if you ever want to hear the outpouring of lies, just go to a divorce hearing. You will hear people saying things that are just incomprehensibly false. And yet they're willing to do that in order to get more money or to justify getting out of the relationship. And they'll just say things that are obviously and patently untrue. And it's a heartbreaking thing. But again, a false witness is somebody who is saying things that they know aren't true because somehow they believe that lying is going to be more profitable to them than telling the truth. And when you get down to it, that's the only reason anybody ever lies. That's the only reason that Eve and Adam took the forbidden fruit, was because they believed that disobedience was more profitable than being obedient. They learned very quickly that that was wrong. And so will every person who engages in being a false witness. They'll eventually, the fact that they have perjured themselves will come out in the wash, and people will know that they were a bold-faced liar. But they do it because they really think, number one, they can get away with it. And number two, they believe it's more profitable to lie about something than it is to tell the truth. And that's the way it will continue to be till the end of time, for that very simple reason. That's why the 7th thing he says that we need to recognize as displeasing. In fact, he puts it at the bottom of the list of the thing that God finds most detestable. He says, it's a man who stirs up dissension among brothers. People who intentionally triangulate relationships. Do you know what I mean by triangulate? It's like person A tells person B that person C is a bad person or is a liar or doesn't like them. And then person A then tells person C that person B doesn't like them. And so they triangulate this relationship. They try to get B and C against one another so that A is at the top. And you find that this is an increasingly common behavior where people are always trying to triangulate relationships. They're trying to cast aspersions on one party or another person in order to make themselves more attractive. I mean, it's interesting because I think even when we look at the very obvious political dimension of our culture right now, that the question that most people have about political parties and political candidates is, what are your policies? Are they good or are they bad? I just want to know, how are your policies going to benefit me? And yet, increasingly, what we find people doing is engaging in just attacking the character of the other people and never telling us what they're for. We know what they're against. We never know what they're for. And that can even happen within the church. We can major in the minors, the point where we're so focused on talking about the things that are bad that we don't talk about the hope of our calling. Well, time's up. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. God bless you.